Hello, welcome Branden to the Creating Meaningful Work podcast. I'm so happy to see you. So glad to have you here.
I am so excited to be here. It's always such a delight to see your face and get to talk with you.
I know you and GoodGoodGood Co, which we'll talk about. Y'all have been a part of Yellow Conference for quite a few years now, and we haven't even had an in-person conference for a few years.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I came into founding GoodGoodGood having already been a fan of what you were doing and like your incredible community. And so it just feels like such a treat anytime that I get to like hang out with like yellow folks, because it's a special group of humans and it's like my kind of people.
Totally. Yeah. I feel like we're very value aligned. I actually was at a conference a few months ago at the beginning of the year, which was the first in-person conference I'd really been a part of since COVID. And it was at USC, and they asked me to speak on a panel there. And the woman who invited me said she found out about me on your podcast.
What? Oh,
yeah.
That makes me so happy.
So I was like, oh, that's awesome. And she's like, yeah, Branden Harvey, I love him. I was like, me too. And so
that's awesome.
Yeah, that was pretty fun. That was very fun. Well, Branden, I would love to hear a little bit for those listening who are not familiar with you, with the work that you're doing. Can you give us a little intro to who you are and a little bit about the work that you do?
Yeah. So I live in beautiful Portland, Oregon with my partner, Sammy, and our dog Pop Tart. And I'm the founder of GoodGoodGood, which is a little media company focused on the good in the world. I feel like right now, especially, people feel really overwhelmed about what's happening in the world. I know that when I'm like scrolling through my Google News feed or whatever, definitely feel really overwhelmed about things that are happening. And so GoodGoodGood is designed to help respond to that. Instead of just stopping at the problems that the world is facing, we go a step further, and we always talk about the people who are creating solutions to these problems so that we can feel more hopeful about the state of the world. And then ultimately, our biggest goal is not just that people would feel more hopeful, but that they would find a way to get involved and make a difference in the issues that they care about. And we truly believe that when you take those steps, it leaves you feeling more hopeful, less cynical, and more capable of living a meaningful life.
This is so important right now. I know you know this. Obviously, it's what you do, but I feel it in myself. I feel it in the conversations that I'm having. People are just we're so overwhelmed with everything that's going on. There's so much happening, and it feels like every single day things are getting more and more complex. I want to read a little excerpt from y'all's website here that I just was like, wow, this is so beautiful. You said, when we see heartbreak, pain, and injustice in the world, we acknowledge and mourn it because it's real. But we never stay there. We then listen to the wisdom of Mr. Rogers when he says, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I mean, that's the thing. We see the heartbreak, we see the pain and the injustice. And, you know, as people who care, as people who are empathetic and care so deeply about the state of our world, about how people are doing and the pain that is being experienced. I think it's really easy to stay there. It's really easy to stay there, but you say we never stay there. We look for the helpers. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll say that sometimes it's not even just about it's easy to stay there, and it is. It's also hard. It's sometimes challenging to even get in a place where you are willing to mourn that pain and to feel that pain. I know for me, my natural inclination for years has always been to shut out the bad, pretend it's not happening. And I have been on this continual like I have continually been experiencing progress around this idea of how can I ensure that I am paying attention to, not just the positive things in the world, but also the negative things in the world? Because Brene Brown says you can't selectively numb emotion. And so if I am not paying attention to injustice and pain in the world, if I'm not mourning those things, then I'm also going to be numbing the same ability to feel hopefulness on the other side. And then you get really stuck there. But when it comes to, mourning the things happening in the world and paying attention to, the things in the news, it's the only first step towards creating a solution. And, I know that Yellow Co is full of a community of people who are working to create solutions, and not a single person in this community has decided to create a solution based off of pretending that the problem didn't exist. It's usually some sort of intimate experience, whether it's personal or through a loved one or through, reading or hearing a story that really moved you, that ultimately leads to the sacrificial life of choosing to make a difference for others. And I think we all should definitely do that for, a cause near and dear to our hearts, something that we're really passionate about. But I think we have an ability to do that on maybe a smaller scale with almost anything that we come in contact with. And I just think it makes us more full humans. It makes our lives a little bit more meaningful. And it is the only thing that I have found that really gives me the continual energy to keep on fighting and working and paying attention. And there's something special and meaningful about the kind of people who do that too. I'm just like really attracted to them. I'm drawn to them because they're living full lives. There's no, selective numbing of emotion. They're truly feeling the world and then reorienting their lives in alignment with those emotions.
Mm-hmm. That's such an important point that you made, that it is really easy to numb and pretend that things don't exist, to really feel our feelings when diving into this stuff or diving into the news. The January 6th committee is presenting, and I just last night was catching up on the first day of the trial, and I had to take intentional time to just kind of sit and feel it.
Yeah.
And that is such an important step, to be able to engage in doing the work to help. Like you said, and I love that you talked about the numbing of pain. When we numb the pain, we also numb the joy. Yeah, it's so important, and it's such hard work. It's so hard to do, to allow ourselves, because especially, there's so many distractions. There's so many things on our to-do list. There's so many things that we are using our time, our screens, or, Instagram. There's like just so much that is fighting for our attention, that it's so easy to numb and so easy not to engage with this stuff. I think it takes real intentionality to feel it, to engage with it.
And also, I feel like there's also a privilege component that comes into it. So for me, as somebody who lives in, Portland, Oregon, as a cisgender dude, who's white, like all of these things largely allow me to kind of consume the news through the news. But there's a lot of other people, let's say that you live in a poorer country, or a country that struggles with democracy more, or you have a different skin color, or you're a woman in the United States. There are news stories that are going to affect you that are not going to affect me. And you might be the person who is the news story is about you, or the news story is about somebody in your community, and you're experiencing it close up. But I have the experience of reading that news story in the New York Times. I had that experience of watching that on, a TikTok news recap. And when you have the privilege of experiencing bad news from afar, I think that gives you a unique opportunity to use that privilege for good. And I even just think about it with a few months after I moved away from beautiful Nashville, Tennessee, up here to Portland, there was a horrific tornado that devastated my old neighborhood. So all my neighbors, they were on the ground responding to, their own personal needs. They all of a sudden had to spend a bunch of money on, their own recovery efforts and paying for a hotel and all these things. They don't have the ability or as much ability to donate their own money towards mutual aid funds, to go and donate blood, to go do all these things. But I, all the way across the country in Portland, have so much more ability to do that because it didn't hit my house. It didn't affect my business or whatever it is. And I think we all had that with the news. And so I think that at the same time, I might need to pay more attention to the news because of that level of privilege, so that I have more opportunity to use that privilege for good than somebody else who is, maybe in the midst of experiencing that locally in their community, in their life. And so I'm not going to say that everybody needs to pay as much attention to the news as I do, or to even choose to feel all these emotions as deeply, because you might be feeling them and experiencing them on a whole different level than I can understand. But I do try to keep that in check of like, man, if I've got this privilege to consume this through the news, then I need to make sure to use that privilege for good. And I think we all have that opportunity with one thing or another.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how do you balance? There's so many issues. There's a million things that we could dive into. I mean, name it. Like, there's just so many. And I feel like for myself, sometimes when I feel the most stuck, it feels like I can't decide where to put my efforts, because it feels like there's so many things. And I would think that I know a lot of people have that same issue. How do you, I mean, you're running a company where you're talking about all the things, but do you have any advice for how to figure out what to engage in, how to figure out how to put boundaries up so you're mentally healthy enough to do the work, but also allowing your heart to break and deciding which causes to help with or to move forward, using your privilege for that good?
Such a good question. I do not think that everybody needs to hold every issue with equal weight. And as somebody who, it's my job to help report on, essentially, we report on every bad news story, but we report on it through the lens of who's creating a solution. So we still have to pay attention to all of these things. But, just this last week, I think, we've done stories about the struggles of LGBTQ refugees around the world, gun violence, the death penalty, abortion, conversations around slavery and the 13th Amendment to the United States. Like, all of these things are really important things. I am not an expert in all of those, and I am not, the best advocate on all of those issues. I think currently the thing that I'm, that I feel like my vocation or my, mission is centered around is the idea of, how do I help people feel less cynical, less overwhelmed, and more capable of getting involved and making a difference? So that's the lens that I'm looking at things through. But I can't just look at that through a lens that doesn't consider all of these external things or all of these specific stories. And I see the same thing being done with, I think about a friend who is a death penalty abolitionist, fighting to ensure that nobody is ever killed by the state, period, but also, who may or may not have done a crime. And, that's their primary focus. But when you're paying attention to that, the whole thing is super intersectional, because, you're going to see that a disproportionate number of the people who are, on death row are people of color. A disproportionate number of people have been affected by or have, perpetuated gun violence. There's law things. There's so many things that are that intersect with this. And so they're going to kind of pick up a few of those causes along the way. And of course, when there is a hurricane that comes through, like a literal hurricane in another part of the country, that might not be this person's primary focus. It doesn't align, exactly with what they're focusing all their time and energy for, but they, I think, have a unique ability to be deeply compassionate and caring in that moment too. And it's okay for them to care about that and to just support others who are a part of that. And kind of bringing it back to what I said earlier, this week, Good has covered, a dozen different types of stories. And I don't feel like it's my job or GoodGood's job to be the number one expert on all of those things. Our job is to help you feel more hopeful in the midst of that so that you can take action. And the best way for us to do that is to help point people towards those leading the way. And I think we all have that ability to do that. So, find your thing that aligns with your passions, your interests, and that'll change over time. And then for everything else, there's still power and value in paying attention to it, because it may or may not intersect with what you're up to. And at the least, you can always continue to point people towards, the other people who are leading the charge on that issue in the same way that you might be leading the charge on your own issue.
Mm-hmm. So good. So good. You do an amazing job at that as well. So you mentioned earlier that to provide a solution to a problem, a lot of times we have to really have that engagement with the problem and really interact with that. Can you talk a little bit about how you started GoodGoodGood Co. and why you started it and kind of your path to this point? I know for a long time you were an influencer on Instagram and Snapchat and telling stories on there. And you shifted now to GoodGoodGood Co. Can you talk a little bit about your story in starting this?
Yeah. So even before the social media influencer stuff, I was a professional photographer. I got started really young. I was really passionate about it. I just really, really liked getting to do creative work for a living. And very quickly, I found that I really liked getting to apply that creative work towards causes that mattered to me. It just felt good to use creativity to make a difference. And I think everybody has this, whether you're creative or not. I believe everybody's creative, but there's something really special about if you are, a carpenter or a construction worker, getting to volunteer your really strong skills to do good in that way. Where I think about this amazing nonprofit Force Blue, where they take like next level, like Navy SEAL style veterans who did like combat diving missions, and they help those veterans, after they come back to the United States, do environmental protection on like coral reefs and underwater and stuff. A really unique skill set that these folks have, and they get to apply it towards something that, feels aligned with their values and passions and making the world a better place. And I think everybody has that. And so for me, it was, wow, I love photography. I love storytelling. What does it look like to work with a bunch of nonprofits? Really quickly, I fell in love with this, started traveling all over the world, helping nonprofits talk about the good that they were doing. I think just because by nature of being a photographer and getting to go to cool places, I did start growing an audience on Instagram and then eventually Snapchat. My claim to fame on Snapchat was because I was one of these early influencers. I got nominated twice for a Shorty Award for Snapchatter of the Year. And I lost Snapchatter of the Year.
Wow.
I lost twice, but here's what matters to me is who I lost to. The first year I lost to DJ Khaled, and the second year I lost to Kylie Jenner. And I'm like, this is the dream, to get to lose to these folks. So
truly, wow, I had no idea. Wow.
I know. But I had this weird thing where like I was a social media influencer on accident, and I started having these incredible, inspiring stories I was hearing all over the world of people making a difference in communities and solving the world's greatest problems. And so I started to figure out, like, what does it look like to tell these stories in a way that people will pay attention to? Because of course, it's hard to compete with DJ Khaled. And apparently I did not succeed in doing that. But my goal was,
Kylie Jenner, you said?
And Kylie Jenner?
I mean, yeah, she was the Snapchat queen.
Queen.
That was like her deal. So
I was like, how do you get humanitarian stories and stories of people creating solutions to problems? And sometimes they're non-sexy things. It's like, hey, we dug a well. hey, we are doing, maternal health clinics. Hey, we're combating HIV and AIDS by reducing stigma. These aren't like, these are really huge and these are saving, truly millions of lives, but they're like, it's not Kylie Jenner showing off her like her new lip line, or like DJ Khaled showing his mansion. Like, and so you've got to work really hard to do like great storytelling to try to compete a little bit. And really quickly, I started to find, okay, this is really hard to do. It's really hard to compete on this level. And around the same time,
you were competing, because I mean, you were in the same sphere.
I was trying.
Lost to these people. So you were definitely there competing.
Okay. But I was like, I don't think I can win. And around the same time, I launched a podcast called Sounds Good. And I got to have this guy on, and his name is Dr. Rick Hansen, and he is a happiness researcher and like a neuropsychologist or something. And he was telling me that the reason that I was struggling with this so much is because our brains evolutionarily, biologically have this internal negativity bias where bad news sticks to our brains like Velcro and good news slides right off our brains like Teflon. And of course, in that hierarchy, you've got first place, bad news. I think second place is going to be DJ Khaled, Kylie Jenner showing off their extravagant lifestyles. And then third place is good news. Like, I think that's, Dr. Hansen didn't say that, but I was reading between the lines. That was the vibe.
Yes.
And so he's like, you basically have to like trick your brain into slowly absorbing this good news. And for me, like the best metaphor for me is back to the social media thing, is the reason why, I get a dozen positive comments on a post on Instagram. And then I get that one that's like a little cynical, a little rude, little whatever. And when I go to bed, I'm not thinking about the hundreds or thousands of people who liked the photo. I'm not thinking about the dozen positive comments. I'm thinking about that one negative one.
Yeah.
And it's because it cuts through our brains. But he said that the way that you can absorb the positive better is that you have to meditate on it for longer. He's got a specific number of seconds and all this stuff. And I was like, I can try to do that, but I need to trick my brain even more. And so I started asking, like, well, if social media is really fast paced and you don't ever get time to meditate on these good news stories because you're always on to the next thing, maybe there's a way to slow this down. So I thought the podcast could be that. We started a newsletter. We tried a few things, but the thing that like, we were like, this could really work, is creating a print newspaper. It felt like it was weird. It felt like it was unique. You've got to turn the pages slowly. You can give it as a gift. We're like, well, what if we create a good news newspaper filled with good news? We'll call it the Good Newspaper. Super original. And I launched this on Kickstarter, and I genuinely was like, okay, I'm putting this on Kickstarter because it's probably going to fail. People aren't going to like it. And if it fails, then I won't be out any money, and nobody else will either, because all the money will just go back to everybody. Within like 3 days, we were fully funded on Kickstarter. At the end of the 30 days, we had more than doubled our campaign goal. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm maybe not a Snapchatter anymore. I guess I've run a newspaper.
That I remember that Kickstarter campaign. And I remember, I mean, you truly are an amazing storyteller, because I remember the video, I remember the visuals, and it was so clearly laid out what you were doing and why. And I think, what year did you say this was?
I feel like it was 2017, maybe 2016.
That was like right after, Trump got into office, right? And we're all like, what is going on? And so it was perfect timing. You told the story so well. I remember that Kickstarter campaign. Yes. Okay. Continue.
And I mean, it was really, so here's the wild part. Like, I think we all have this, where we all have an idea and maybe a vision on how we can make a difference. And the idea is the easiest part. I've got a journal full of ideas. I think we all do. And then began the process of figuring out, like, how do you actually do this? And I'm sure I've learned this with Yellow, like, when you are creating something, you have to learn all these other things that you didn't expect to learn. Like, I had to learn ink density levels. I had to learn how to print like a newspaper and who to print. Like, I had to like literally like find old phone books to find like printers to partner with, because There's no YouTube tutorials on making a newspaper in the year 2017.
Wow.
There's not like some of these folks didn't even have websites, didn't have email addresses. Like it's an old industry. So I had to like learn how to do things from scratch. I had to learn how to ship a newspaper. We used to spend like $4 shipping each newspaper until we found out that like you could just do a different thing through USPS and ship them for like $1. Like all of these things where I'm like, you don't know these things. And that's not even, I didn't get into this because I wanted to get good deals on mailing things. I got into this because I wanted the end result of people to feel more hopeful and do more good. And so that's, and that's just the continual journey we've been on, where it's like, I'm trying to become an expert on good news and hope and activism, while also simultaneously having to become an expert in how to run a business, how to print newspapers and ship them, and then apologize when, a particular postal branch gets shut down and 1,000 newspapers get stuck in that postal branch while everybody's out with COVID and all these things where I'm like, I did not like, you're doing both these things at once. And it's simultaneously so fulfilling and so overwhelming, but the whole time it's like energizing. And so that's, I guess, the backstory on how we got into this. And so we're just continuing that mission, in addition to, the print good newspaper, trying a bunch of other things. We had our Instagram blow up during the pandemic, and everything is just focused on how do we help people feel more hopeful and do more good.
Wow. I think that so much of what you said, do you feel like you stepping into this new space and kind of, okay, this idea happened, you realize that we need to meditate on good stories in order to have the good stuff stick with us, and moving in the direction that you did you feel like you were kind of working towards being more and more aligned with who you were and what you wanted to express? Or how did you learn more about who you are as Branden Harvey and how do you continue to learn about who you are through this journey of creating this work?
Yeah, I think more and more, I think through this whole process, I've had a number of identity shifts. So in the beginning, when I was a photographer, I was dead set on my identity being that I was a photographer. I had like 3 photographers I admired. And I was like, when I am older, that's who I will be. That's what my career will look like. And the closer that I got to my career looking like theirs, the more clients I got, the more like weddings I booked, like all the things, I started to feel less fulfilled because I was moving in the wrong direction. And that's kind of actually when the pivoting towards nonprofit stuff happened, where I was like, man, when I volunteered with that nonprofit last year, I really, really loved the work. I loved what we created. Let me try that again. And then, I got hired to do a nonprofit thing, and it was like half the budget of a wedding. And it was the same. It was like a wedding weekend or something. And I was like, I'm going to choose the one that pays me a little bit less because I think I'm going to be more fulfilled. And then you start making choices that affect your money. And then at one point I realized like, okay, wait, my identity isn't even tied up in the creativity side of things as much as it is like the storytelling, but also like what is the actual story being told, until eventually, I found that I think that really like, I'm just really drawn to this idea of like helping myself and by nature of that others feel less cynical about the world and more hopeful. And then through that, more capable of taking action. And it was all just like, these are the problems I have. I have a hard time taking action, even though I care about this issue. I have a hard time feeling hopeful, even though I care about this issue. And so it's an extension of that, for everything else I do. And it's interesting because it's like, I don't think I will still have a news. I don't think I'll be running a day-to-day newspaper, 20 years from now, either because all of these like 100-year-old machines we print on are going to be broken and there's not going to be people alive who know how to fix it, or because I will have found a different way to continue this mission. And so I'm not even tied to the newspaper part. I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's the newspaper guy or whatever. But I feel very much tied to like the mission side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that also can change at some point in your life too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I might have a completely different mission, and all of these years of experience will help support that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, I think it's been really, really interesting because a lot of the problems that I'm trying to solve for others are problems that I had to first solve for myself. And then I recognized that somebody else was struggling with it too. And then another person and another person.
It's not always the case that when we struggle with something, when usually I venture even to say 99.9% of the time when we have a problem, other people have experienced it too.
Mm-hmm.
And what I hear you saying is that you have a good sense of your why, of your mission, of your heart, of what you value, and the how can change. The how can go from, you know, the photographing the work of nonprofits to telling these stories through the Good newspaper. But that why, that mission, the values that you hold will remain or even emerge more through different things. And what I hear you also saying is that you followed your curiosity. You followed the things that made you feel fulfilled. I think so often we feel like we have to have this whole map planned out and this whole path, like every step of the way, we need to have it planned out before we, you know, figure out what the next step's going to be, when really following your curiosity, feeling things out. Okay, you were shooting weddings. That didn't feel great, but this thing felt really good. Why don't I do another one of those? It's so similar to my story as well. My background's in graphic design, and I actually, prior to graphic design, thought I was going to be a wedding photographer as well.
Yes.
And I shot a few weddings and I was like, this is not for me.
The wedding photographer to social entrepreneur pipeline is real.
That is so funny. I mean, I think, as you said, there's so many things and experiences that you learned from that time where nothing is in vain. I really believe that
truly
the work that I did as a graphic designer for so many years, I mean, my ability to design and create things really quickly has helped Yellow so much. I mean, in so many different ways. And even, you know, back in the photography days, like just having an eye for what looks good and even directing people creatively is so helpful and important. And I mean, I know your eye is great, and the visuals of Good newspaper are such a huge part of what you are all doing, because there's not a lot of newspapers that are looking as good as what you're doing. So you can tell you have a creative background.
We're like, if we're the only millennials who are creating a newspaper, like we got to represent, we got to make it cute. We got to make it fun. And I can't take any credit for the aesthetics. But you know, I think what you said though is right. Like if you know, have a background in something, like you can apply it a little bit here and there. And I think the other thing you said that really stood out to me too is this idea of like leaning into that curiosity is so huge, and you can do it in small ways at first. So for me, it was like, I'm a wedding photographer every weekend, but on some weekdays, I can go volunteer at a place. And then at some point, you might take a small risk by saying, I'm going to lose the opportunity to make wedding money this weekend, and I'm just going to make nonprofit money this weekend. And then eventually you can, you know, take a much bigger risk, which for me was saying, I'm going to launch a Kickstarter campaign, and I'm probably going to like not get like social media influencer money for a little while. Like, you know, that's a much bigger risk. And I felt very privileged to have been able to do that. And I felt ready, but at the same time, I also did not feel ready. And if I had waited completely until I was ready, I would have waited, you know, 3+ years. And like you said, you know, the timing actually of launching the newspaper ended up being pretty good. You know, a lot of people were kind of questioning, wow, how did this thing happen in politics? What is going to be my role in our civic society as a result of this? And so by just launching before I knew how to ship things through the postal service, and before I knew how to print a newspaper and how ink density worked, like we were able to meet that moment, and I was able to figure it out in time. I still had a financial obligation to these people who had, supported this thing with their money, and we met that expectation. So I had to like hustle to figure things out. But I wasn't ready when we launched the Kickstarter. I just forced myself to become ready. And I think everybody has the opportunity to do that with some things, but it's okay to start with small risks. You don't have to do the big risk first.
So if you didn't feel ready, what made you decide I'm going to do this?
I think it was truly, I thought to myself, I need this. Like I was like, I am somebody who is paying a lot of attention to the good in the world. I literally have a job, working with nonprofits, where I get to see the good in the world up close and personal. And it is really helpful for me, but I'm still not absorbing this information in quite the right way. I'm still not like saturating myself in this good news enough. I think that there's a better way, and nobody else is going to solve that problem for me. So I should solve that problem for me. And then, of course, the Kickstarter is basically asking, is there anybody else who would like this problem solved for them? Because if it was just for me, I could have, figured out something else. But once enough people raised their hands with the Kickstarter and said, actually, this would help me too, that was when I was like ready. But the reason that I was ready to move forward was because I needed it myself. And for some people, depending on what issue you care about, you don't have to be personally affected by the issue you care about, but there's probably somebody you love or admire who is, and you can look at it through that framework too. But I think it's okay to start before you're ready.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I think that attitude allows you then to go into the newspaper world and figuring out how to print these newspapers and dealing with the postal service, all these things that you had no idea about. I think the attitude of, I'm going to still walk into this, even though I don't know everything. I don't know what I don't know. Yeah. That attitude, I think, is so important to have, not just at the beginning when you decide to, launch the Kickstarter or take that first step, but that mindset, I think, is so important to continue and to take you through those learning experiences, as you're running this business and building a team and doing all the things that you're doing. It's so important to have that mindset of, I'm going to still walk into this, even though I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know everything.
And it's remarkable to the amount of doors that will open by just admitting that you don't know what you're doing. Like the number of people who were so generous to me early on in GoodGoodGood when I just said, hey, I've never printed something before. What do I need to know? They're like, hey, come on into the office and we can have like a 2-hour meeting. You can ask any question you want. So I came prepared with those questions. Same thing happened with shipping. Same thing happened with advertising. Same thing happened with journalism. Like I just told a lot of people, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. And I see that you have a lot more experience than me. Like, and it wasn't even me saying, can you help me? It was just me being transparent. And then the generosity that showed up from that was huge. And all of those people like played such a huge role in GoodGoodGood. I think everybody has that with the things that they create too. It's such a beautiful feeling also because it's like, it's more than just me. Like this GoodGoodGood is not something that I could have or did create on my own. It's something that a community of people who saw potential and opportunity to help created. And like, that is so special to like invite other people into that process.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's so true. Just that authenticity and that transparency. It's easy to get caught up in like, oh, I'm supposed to act like I know everything. And when you are just open and like, I have no idea how to do this, that allows for people to help you. And it's so key. I mean, throughout, our entire journeys to be able to ask for help and allow people to help us. Cause we can't do it alone. How do you get through or work through the times that are really hard when like the postal office has shut down? And I know COVID was like a wild time for postal service. I don't know where it's at now, but I know it was wild for a while. What helps you through those times?
Well, I'll use the example of that crisis, but I think it applies to other things too. 2020, literally like 75% of our newspapers just got stuck in a warehouse somewhere, and they essentially got lost for like
75%?
3 weeks. It was really, really bad. And it was just like, it was this weird thing where it was like out of our control, and it was kind of out of a lot of people's control who were trying to help us. And we were getting all these customers being like, where's my newspaper? I paid for my newspaper. And we're like, we also want you to have your newspaper. And so we ended up basically just being fully transparent. Like I know that probably business textbooks would tell you to do it differently, but we sent out an email with the headline that said, the great shipping crisis of 2020. We called it Shipping Catastrophe 2020. We're sorry. And we sent this thing out, and we just explained to people what's happening. We say, this is not okay. We're going to try to get this to you within the next week. If it doesn't, I think we were like, we'll refund you, or we can extend your subscription. We'll literally, if it's like totally permanently lost, we'll reprint this at our own cost. We were just fully transparent about this. And I think we had to keep a good sense of humor about it, just by being like, this is a catastrophe. Let's acknowledge that it's a catastrophe. It's out of our hands. And that doesn't mean that it's not like that it's not within our control. You know what I mean? It's like, we have a responsibility to get this right, even if somebody else messed up along the way. And I think the other thing too, is just like having our team really aligned, and just like, even if you're working on your own, like yourself personally aligned with like, what is our mission? Our mission is not to be a business that like makes money. Our mission is to help people feel more hopeful and do more good. And by these newspapers getting stuck in a warehouse, we are failing at that mission. And our mission is not to make this money or to save money. So we're like, okay, well, if we've got to pay to reship these, pay to reprint this, like that's fine, because that's in line with our mission. And I think, in fact, we might have even in that email, like included some good news stories at the bottom. We're like, you should know about these good news stories. Oh, you know what I think we might have done is we might have shared an early version of like the digital edition so that people could like read it online, even though it's not quite the same. We're just like, our goal is to help you feel more hopeful, do more good. And right now we're failing. So we're going to do our best to do that, even if it costs us money, or we've got to get creative. And I think that honestly really helps, where I'm just like I thought that creating a print newspaper was going to be a solution to this problem that I saw, paying extra for shipping is also a solution to this. And both can be really creatively invigorating in the same way, even though one is a logistics challenge and one is a creative challenge.
Oh man. So you went back to your values, back to the why, back to the why are we here? What are we doing? And how do we continue to do that even in the midst of this catastrophe that is totally out of our hands? Yeah. And back to that authenticity and that transparency.
Unfortunately, it hasn't happened since too. I got to say it. I feel like the Postal Service had a really, really bad few months, and they were working so hard to make sure that we could all vote. And I think just right before that, they just, forgot to help us, but they've been great since then. And I know that our whole team learned a lot too. And it made us more resilient for other challenges and other problems in the future. And, again, that's something that I think we'll all carry with us, beyond good, to anything that we were to create in the future too.
And I bet it also helped your community feel even more attached to what you're doing. They say that if someone has a problem with a brand, and then they have a good experience with helping the brand, helping them solve that problem, they actually love the brand even more than they would have if they never had that problem at all.
That's super cool. Yeah, I think that mission-driven brands have a unique ability to lean into that too, because if you're not profit-oriented, then you just get to like use this as an opportunity to like showcase your values, which is what somebody's already drawn to anyway. I know somebody, and they give their customer service person like essentially like they're like, you have a budget of $200 a week to make somebody's day. We don't have this. We should do this. And they're like, so sometimes that means, oh my gosh, your thing didn't arrive on time. I can overnight you another package of this. And sometimes it's somebody saying, hey, I'm so excited. I'm sending this to my mom for Mother's Day. Will it arrive on time? And you say yes. And then you also order like a bouquet of flowers to get shipped to his mom too. Like there's this is not me. This is an example of a friend whose company does this. I'm like,
I love
what
that.
a cool thing where they're just like, they're empowering their team to also live into their values. I don't know. That might be like nerdy customer service stuff, but I love that like even the least cool parts of a business can live out the things that you care about.
Because at the end of the day, it's humans interacting with humans, like that's it. That's what it comes down to. We're all just people trying to live our lives, do our best. And it's when we can connect on that level of human to human, it reminds us that that's what we are, we get so caught up in the business side, the bottom line, the outcomes of everything when we're just humans.
Yeah. And also like every metric, every like little number in a spreadsheet, all of these things are related. Like it's a human on the other side. When I look at how many people are on our website in a day, like those are all humans who took time out of their day because they care about paying attention to the good and making a difference. Like what a beautiful thing to celebrate. And even though it might be, 100 less people than yesterday, like, maybe those people from yesterday are outgoing and doing good. Like it's so cool to think about it in non-abstract terms and just being like, let's believe the best here. And let's also just like know that these are humans and we get to like help humans. It's so cool.
Yeah. And I think what we're seeing in so much of the not good news that is happening in the world right now is like that disconnect from the humanity of our experience, of not valuing the humanity of others in so many different ways. So yeah, I think it makes it even more meaningful when you bring that into your work, into the workplace, into your team culture, into your workplace culture. It's so important. All right, Branden, last question for you. What thoughts, bit of advice, things to think about would you offer someone who is on the journey of connecting with themselves, connecting with their work, working to make the world a better place through their meaningful work?
I think I honestly, here's my advice, and it has been so helpful to me, and it's probably not the advice that like most people are expecting here, but I would really encourage everybody to find and keep friends who don't care at all about what you do. The work that we do is so like cool and is personally motivating and it's energizing and hard. And sometimes you end up in a place where people know you for it. But it's really great to have friends who anchor you in who you are and what you care about. And I just feel so grateful to have like a few friends that like know me, they care about me, but they don't care at all about my shipping catastrophe. They don't care at all about if we just had like a really cool influencer share about us. They just care about how that affects me and like how I'm doing. And that is so grounding, where it allows you to have bad days and to have good days and to know that like you are still you the whole way through. And it can be really lonely to do a mission, to create a mission driven thing that's aligned with something deeply a part of you, because you have to wear your heart on your sleeve all the time, and you can build up some defenses, and it's hard. But if you've got people that you can count on who care about you, and you work to keep them in your life and they work to keep you in theirs, like I think it's a superpower. I think it's a really special thing, and I know it's hard, but it's I'm so grateful.
That's so important. Thank you for that. Where can we find you, support the work that you're doing, and follow Good Co?
We share good news stories on our website every day at goodgoodgood.co. Of course, we are on Instagram too. We've got a beautiful email newsletter. All of the above are free. And then the only thing that we charge for is the print newspaper filled with good news. And it does two things for you. One, you get this newspaper in the mail every month. We all love snail mail. It's like $8 a month. It's a good deal to get like the delight of that every month. But two, you using your, financial resources, your privilege to like subscribe to this newspaper, allow us to do all of those other free things for other people. And you get to basically be a part of filling the world with more good news, but you don't have to deal with warehouse issues. So it's kind of an ideal scenario, but all of that is on our website at goodgoodgood.co.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here and for this conversation. It's so good to chat with you today.
Thank you. This is such a treat. And I love this show and I love your community. And I'm so grateful to be here.
Thanks, Branden.